but he's on. Hopefully he'll come on the camera and on the mic. And we don't have that much time, but we will hopefully learn about his books. He has some very interesting information about Kentucky. His focus is on Kentucky, where he's from.
I
And
used to
so, uh, are you doctor? Yes, you're a doctor. So, Dr. Smith, welcome to Black Authors Matter TV.
Oh,
Yeah, talk.
I'm getting feedback. It's a delay.
Okay, you need to turn off your other device. Whatever you have some other device on, you need to turn it off or turn the volume off, turn the sound off of your second device, whatever that is.
I don't have any other device on.
You don't have your cell phone or anything? You don't have your cell phone?
And we don't hear a delay.
Yeah, we don't hear any delay.
It sounds like I'm talking to 5 people. And then I'm hearing myself.
Okay, is Facebook on your computer? Are you in Facebook on your computer? If you are, you need to close the browser. That's the problem.
Yeah, close up Facebook.
Close your Facebook browser. You're just supposed to be in Zoom only.
Okay. Yeah, I was can you hear me now?
Yeah. Perfect.
Okay. Yeah, I clicked on I only got about 4 minutes, but anyway, I clicked on the link that was sent to me. It said for the interviewees only. So that's the one I clicked on. So I watched the entire interview with the other guests. And so I just thought I was in the holding room or something.
Okay.
Because my link said only the interviewee uses this link.
Okay.
You know.
Okay. Yeah, that's okay. That
We're good. No worries. Yeah. I'm fine. Trust me. Yeah. I enjoyed the other conversation. I'm a pastor as well. So
I know that. And so
I can go.
We had 2 pastors, well, two people in ministry back to back. And that the combination of guests on the show is normally kind of random because the 4 slots are scheduled at different times. So, but that's great because we can continue some of what we were talking about. Your background, though, is history, and you are also a pastor. So you're a historian. Were you a pastor first or a historian first?
Historian. I'm a professor at the University of Kentucky, and I got my PhD in 1988. So I was a professor for 8 years before I acknowledged my call to preach in 1996. And then I started pastoring in 2003. Pastored one church for 8 years, and I'm now pastoring my second church, Pilgrim Baptist Church, which is in Lexington, Kentucky. So I've got a little over 20 years as a pastor. And more than 28 years in the ministry, and then 36 years as a professor.
Professor, okay. One of the books that I saw that really caught my attention was actually your previous book, your Kentucky African American Encyclopedia.
Oh, yeah.
Which I thought was so unique. And I was wondering what is included in the encyclopedia and what encouraged you to do something like that.
Well, it's the first of its kind. It was published originally in 2015. So it's comprehensive. It includes people, places, events, organizations, institutions. We wanted to make it accessible to students, to young people, but also having enough intellectual integrity to it that anybody can read it and get some unknown facts about the Kentucky Black experience. So there are a number of photographs in it, and wanted to make sure that when we wrote about individuals that they were more pen portraits. In other words, not only speak about the person's life, but go as far as to even identify where they're buried. Because as people are reading the encyclopedia, there are people who are in cemeteries who are well known in Kentucky during the time they lived, and nobody even knows they existed. I just gave a talk this past Saturday in the western part of Kentucky, in Hopkinsville, Kentucky. And in my presentation, I shared some things about their local cemetery that the people didn't even know, are real interesting unknown facts. But that book, the Kentucky African American Encyclopedia, was published in 2015, which actually served as a springboard for the book that was published last year, Slavery and Freedom in the Bluegrass State, Revisiting My Old Kentucky Home. And let me just pause real quick. Thank you so much for the invitation. I appreciate you gave me 5 minutes. That's a blessing. So I'm not worried about that. Whatever happened, I'm good. I am real laid back. Okay.
I will say though, your book does sound intriguing. I don't know if you heard when I said I lived in Kentucky for 3 years, a long time ago. That was my first duty station. I was stationed at Fort Knox.
Yeah.
Yeah, so Elizabethtown, Radcliffe, Louisville, that was my corridor up and down
Wow.
that street. So yeah, so just listening to you kind of brings back some memories when you were naming some of the towns where you've been.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
so
And I've been all over the state. With the encyclopedia, really took me and my editors all over the state of Kentucky. And I would often we have two daughters, and my youngest daughter at the time was about 14 years old. She loved to travel with dad, as I went to these different places, and she would take notes and that sort of thing. I thought she was going to be a historian like her dad, but she's an OBGYN. She decided to do something
she's a doctor, so
is her calling.
Well, yeah, but
Yeah,
she's
real
still
proud.
a doctor.
She's still a doctor, and I always tell people she's a real doctor. I
Just
can't help you. She can help you, but a
you
lot of that.
oh, I
I'm
was just
sorry.
you were doing the research for the encyclopedia. Did you find that there were African Americans right in the state who didn't know some of the history that
Oh
you
yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah, for sure. I mean, just and understand that there were over 100 authors who wrote entries for the encyclopedia. And as the general editors, our responsibility was to really identify, what entries we wanted to include it, because it was in a book, you can't include everything and everybody. So there had to be some guidelines in place to discern, okay, who's in, who's out, who's on the fence. There are 120 counties in Kentucky, doing as best as we could to represent each of the counties with an entry to make sure that it was diverse, not only in terms of regionally, but also in terms of men and women, young and old, professionals, lay people, ordinary folks, those who did extraordinary things, which included people like Muhammad Ali, for example.
yeah. Yeah.
um, was
Yeah,
he from Kentucky?
and
Yeah, he's from Louisville.
he has a
Oh,
museum in Louisville, doesn't he?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
The museum, the Muhammad Ali Center, is in Louisville, but he's from Louisville. I mean, that's his home. That was his home, and
oh,
he's
okay.
buried in Louisville too.
Oh, okay. I didn't realize. I didn't really know where he was from.
There's a lot of history in Kentucky, but I didn't know. Well, I knew it later. I knew it while I was living there, but I found out, I guess, about a year or so after I had moved there, was that when I was stationed at Fort Knox, there was an airfield called Godman Army Airfield, and that was actually Tuskegee Airmen base at
Mm-hmm.
back in the 40s, and
Mm-hmm.
I had the pleasure and the opportunity to interview a Tuskegee Airman. He's long since passed, but I was really honored to be able to go to his home, and I got to meet him. And he invited a friend over, and we got to just sit and listen to them share their memories of being stationed at Godman Army Airfield.
Mm-hmm.
So
And
hopefully
some of them lived in Richmond, Kentucky. Richmond, Kentucky is about 25 miles from Lexington.
Mm.
And one of the gentlemen just passed less than 10 years ago. I know. In fact, that one of the highways is named for Tuskegee Airmen.
Hmm. Now, when we think, normally Kentucky is not one of the places that you normally will say it's a lot of Black people. You know what I mean?
Right.
It's
And I
not.
know exactly what you mean.
Okay.
That was
It's
a
not.
reason behind the book.
Okay.
I mean, and definitely the reason behind the book. And if I could just have, I know my time is up. I got 1 minute, but
You can
but if
do
I could
two
just say,
minutes.
okay, 2 minutes. Thank you. if I could just say, one quick word about this book, Slavery and Freedom in the
Yes,
Bluegrass State,
yes.
Revisiting My Old Kentucky Home. And the reason I titled it Revisiting My Old Kentucky Home, perhaps you watched the Kentucky Derby or heard them singing My Old Kentucky Home, the sun shines bright in my old, all of that whole fanfare and so forth. And, it's basically a song written by Stephen Collins Foster, who is writing in the voice of an enslaved person being sold to the Deep South. And the myth is that slavery was milder in Kentucky than it was, let's say, in Mississippi and Georgia and Alabama and all of that. And so I titled the book Revisiting My Old Kentucky Home because, I thought that it's important that I use that song as well as the site, because there is a museum, My Old Kentucky Home in Bardstown, Kentucky. And so I wanted to use the song and the site as a visual metaphor, for how we understand, how we teach, how we learn, how we study the Black experience in Kentucky. Because as you said, nobody really thinks about Black people in Kentucky because it's a northern state. But what happened, and I started working on this book in the spring of 2020, right after the killing of Breonna Taylor. And so with the killing of Breonna Taylor in Louisville in March of 2020, now all of a sudden, not only is racial justice and violence and policing and all of that's happening around the world, and questions about equity, but what her killing did, it put a global spotlight on the state of Kentucky and on Louisville, which is the largest city in Kentucky. And all of a sudden, everybody's like, wait a minute, what's going on in Louisville, Kentucky? I've heard of the Derby, but look what's happening, how Black people are being treated. And so I wanted to sort of capture, the enslaved period, freedom, as well as civil rights, and look at various themes in the state, looking at identity, looking at freedom, looking at violence, looking at citizenship. How did all of this relate to Black people in Kentucky, which was a border state? We hear about Georgia, Mississippi, Alabama, or even in the North, whether it's cities like Chicago or Detroit, Milwaukee, the list goes on. But as you said, nobody thinks about Kentucky. And Kentucky has an amazing story.
Do you have a copy of your new book with handy?
I do not.
Okay.
I know it's hard to believe. The book came out in January of 2023. I gave the last copy away to a person, and mine are at my office.
But that's the poster behind you, right?
No, that's two. I have 5 books.
Okay.
And one deals with Martin Luther King, but I have 4 on Kentucky. That's one of the encyclopedia behind me.
Gotcha.
And then I have another book on Lexington, and then I have the book that we were just talking about, Slavery and Freedom in the Bluegrass State. And then I have another one on a Black college president. You've heard of Kentucky State University, perhaps? Well, I wrote, my first book was on a man named Rufus Atwood, who was the president of Kentucky State College. And so in that book, I talked about the role of Black college presidents during the period of segregation. And because many of our leaders in the 1960s were products of these Black higher learning institutions, whether it's, Ralph Abernathy, or whether it's Whitney Young, the list goes on and on. In fact, Whitney Young was a graduate of Kentucky State who was influenced by Rufus Atwood. So I thought it was important to really capture what the Black college president was doing during the period of segregation. Okay. And again, thank you so much. I've overspent my time. I'm sorry about the confusion, but that's the way things work for me. That's why I don't sweat. It's always some drama.
But you know what? You might have had 10 minutes, but you put out so much information, and that 10 minutes is so interesting. So I thank you for taking the time to go ahead and talk with us anyway.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. And this is Professor or Dr. Gerald. What's your middle initial? L. L. Smith. So look him up. His books are on.
Yeah, we can go to our church. Now for me, let me say this. Now, I love being a professor, right? And doing the research, but my calling is pastoring. Okay. And so that's why I enjoyed. And so our church is Pilgrim Baptist Church, pbcchurch.org. pbcchurch.org. And but anyway, thank you so much. Y'all have a good evening.
Thank you too.
Okay, bye.
Bye-bye.